All right,
Are now recording.
great. Well, welcome to the CAB meeting on, what is it? It's May 20th. So yeah, let's start with welcome everybody to Zoom. Is there anyone that feels they need any help in getting things set up and going? Or is everybody ready? Looks like everybody is
I'm ready. I have the attachments up.
Great. All right. So let's start with meetings and minutes. So we have, we talked about the schedule for the plan, and it looks like that June 8th is sometime during that week is a good time for this group to meet as a next meeting. And I think we're going to do a doodle poll and get it posted by June 5th in order to find the exact time. Does anyone have conflicts or think that there's a better way to deal with that? I don't see anybody waving their hands, so I think we'll go ahead with doing that to schedule the next meeting. And at our next meeting, we'll figure out our July meeting.
I'm sorry, what day did you say that was?
Yeah, so we don't have a specific day. So we're going to do it the week of June 8th. And we're going to do a doodle poll with this group before then to pick an exact time and get it posted by June 5th so that everybody can look to the town calendar and know what time that week it's going to happen.
Thanks.
Hey, Brian, one thing would be helpful is if we could resolve that before June 5th.
Yeah.
Because if we wait till then, various other things will start coming up.
Yes. So with COVID and all of the things in flux, that's what we Kate and I decided that we'd figure out the next meeting time with. We will definitely get it figured out. I think June 1st, we'll probably send out the doodle poll, and that way by June 5th, everything will be resolved, and that following week we'll have the meeting.
Okay.
So on minutes, did everyone get a chance? Well, I got to stop asking everyone questions because we're on Zoom. It's difficult. Does anyone have edits to the minutes from April 9th? I did not get a chance to review them, so I trust in whoever did the minutes did them well.
Jake did them. He did a good job.
Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes or continue discussion?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Great, thank you, Brian. Anyone second?
Second.
Second. All right, and what we'll do to do the vote is we have to do a round robin or a roll call vote, just because it's Zoom. Mm-hmm. So I got a list of names, and I'll ask you to just raise your hand to say you approve, and then you can speak if you disagree. So Pam Hill, approve. Warren, do you approve?
Approve.
Courtney, do you approve?
Approve.
Okay. Michael, do you approve? Jake, do you approve?
Approve.
Great. Ruthie, do you approve?
I don't think I was at that meeting, so I'm going to abstain.
Abstain. John?
Approve.
Brian Crownston?
I think I need to abstain too.
Okay. Peter?
Approve.
And I approve as well. So it passes, and we approve the minutes, and it's a very laborious process to do that. All right, so I wanted to give a quick chairs update on two of the topics that concern us. One is, if you haven't heard about town meeting, it's being postponed until the fall. It's being postponed 1 month at a time, but its expectation is that it will happen in the fall. So I feel that we can discuss the articles coming up at a later meeting, and that we don't need to use this time to do the article discussions until we get closer to the actual town meeting. And on the note of town meeting being pushed out, memberships are usually renewed on after town meeting for different committees. So the select board has extended the current appointments to this committee and to others. But if we want to make any changes, we can discuss that as well. If someone else wants to be chair, I've been chair for a year. It shouldn't be, the same person all the time, but I'm willing to do it. And if you want to make that change, let Kate know, and we can bring it up at the next meeting. It's tough without the feedback.
I know, isn't it? It's like there's no eye contact. I mean, you can't really have any kind of emotional connection, right?
Right. I feel like I'm talking to myself in a closet.
Like,
No, you're talking to me in my living room. It's great.
Oh, wonderful.
you're waiting for somebody to say something.
Right. But I can't ask people to say something because we all will talk at once.
Right.
So the other topic I wanted to give an update on was the middle school building project. So that has the committee has announced that they're going to pause their process. So they're going to complete the feasibility study portion, pause the project, and return to do schematic design at a later date. There's concerns about town budgets and other things going on. I know that through my involvement with that process, sustainability is in a very good place. They're using passive house standards. They've got a lot of the details about how that building will be sustainable in a nice, succinct 3-page document that they've kind of summarized all their work, and it's being integrated into the current feasibility study. So good spot, being on pause. The other component was that they were in the process of getting a letter to CMLP about doing the solar generation for that project. I don't know the status of that letter, but I hope that it gets out so that CMLP can really start working on that. And
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
On the first of all, I thought it was a really great letter that the whole advisory board put together. But I'm curious to know, once you submitted that to the committee, did they acknowledge it in any way, either in their minutes, or are they going to send a response back with a letter? How do we get any feedback from that committee?
So I did notice that they didn't bring it up at their meeting. They did say that there was correspondence, but there was no discussion of our specific letter in their meeting, which is what I hope to see. And later I found out that there's a lot of other letters they get from people who want a larger gym, people who want other facets of this project, and they tend to treat them how they treated ours. I did speak with Tom. He's the chair of that committee, about that letter, giving me reassurances that they are committed to doing a sustainable building, something that has a very low energy intensity, and that has renewables on site, and that they are going through the process. So personally, I would have liked to see the larger committee discuss it more, and it is something that I think I would ask when they start up again, that they review that letter as well as the summary of where they were when they left off on sustainability. But again, that's just my input as a citizen participating in the meetings, not as someone on the committee. So
Yeah.
that
Brian, go ahead.
Pam.
I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. Who is representing us on the committee? Is it Kate?
So Kate is on the committee. The head of, or the chair of the subcommittee on sustainability is Matt Root. He's got a lot of professional experience in sustainable buildings.
No, I guess, well, no, that gets to my point. It would seem to me that Kate, as a member, should be raising this.
Yeah.
So that, because I think Michael is making an excellent point. We should be getting some kind of a response, and it should be loaded into the thought process. And if we're not, then our committee rep should be making the point, if possible, in the meeting.
We don't have a committee liaison. Kate is there in her professional position as the Director of Sustainability on the committee. So she's not there representing CAB specifically, but she's representing sustainability values for the town as a town staff. But we can talk about that. They're pausing, so talking about it now and getting them focused on it, they're all going to disappear for a few months.
Right.
But when they return, I think we should, as a committee, reissue this letter or ask for that public response.
Right.
Just add that there will be a feasibility, like a report that comes out to wrap up this feasibility stage. And so when that's available, I can forward it to all of you, just to make sure that you get to see it. And that I'm not sure exactly what's going to be in there. I imagine it's going to be very detailed and summarize kind of all of the work that's been done to date as far as feasibility, including all of the sustainability goals for the project. So that would probably be a good next step for CAB, is to review that. And then when the committee starts up again, discuss whether you want to bring up another letter or the same letter, and how to engage with them when they restart.
Well, we try to make that easy so this doesn't become like another task that they have, because as you know, in the letter, we offered to have them come to one of our meetings, and we would just, talk face to face about sort of where they are, where we are, just sort of try to create some kind of relationship so that, we're basically in the same corner.
Correct. So could I suggest that we pick this up at a future meeting, and I will put it on one of the future agendas, because I do want to make sure that we spend most of our time today talking about the plan. All right. That actually transitions directly into Kate's portion, where she's going to give us an update on the plan, and we'll go from there. Kate?
Awesome, thank you. Excited to talk to you all about the first full draft of the plan, which you all reviewed, and thank you for doing that. I know it is not exactly light reading. There's a lot of pages to get through, but really glad that we've gotten to this point. Just a quick recap for maybe anyone who's joining who hasn't been following the whole process from the beginning, but how we got to this first draft is that, most recently at our last meeting, we confirmed the list of priority actions that are in the plan. And so the first draft involved building out the remaining blueprints that were already drafted for all of those 22 actions, and combining with all the previous materials, the fact sheets, and adding in all of the introduction material around our greenhouse gas emissions and climate impacts and all of that good stuff. And of course, incorporating all the feedback that you and the municipal team have given to date to get to that first draft. So I'm really excited that we were able to get that out and get all of your feedback. Before we get into reviewing your feedback, I just wanted to give you an update on the next steps so you know where we're going. The next step is to take this content with all of your revisions and feedback and put it into a second draft, which will be a designed version. So basically going to be the kind of gussied up, pretty version of the plan that will look a lot more like a final plan. That will be released around June 8th. And that's obviously going to be sent to all of you guys, to the Municipal Advisory Board, and put out for public comment. So obviously the public has been commenting all along, but really, putting this out and saying, please give us your comments. So in conjunction with that, I'm also going to record a short presentation with the highlights of the plan, knowing that it's a big document. So to give people kind of the 10-minute version of what is this plan and what's in it. And then public comments will be due June 19th. As Brian mentioned, we'll meet the week of June 8th to get your feedback on that second draft version. And from there, we'll get all those revisions into the final draft, which will be done by the end of the month and put out in early July. And then we'll be done with this portion of the planning process and get to move into implementation. So that's where we're at. I think Brian's going to take us through a quick discussion on one point of feedback that we've gotten, and then I'll give you an overview of some of the common trends in the feedback we've received, and we'll do a round robin so everyone can share any additional comments that they have.
Yeah, so thank you. So we had a lot of great feedback on the content, on the setup for the plan and discussion about how to communicate these ideas. But one thing that did come up in many different areas of the plan was accountability. The sense that we wanted to make sure that this plan didn't get stuck on a shelf, or people said, oh yeah, we're gonna work on this, and then 5 years later, when we do the update, we find that there's no work has really been done, and people wanted to focus on the accountability. So to focus on getting this first report, the contents of what we want them to get done, to have this meeting kind of more focused on that, I wanted to talk about accountability in completing these tasks. And so, you know, we should as a committee, you know, send a letter to the select board and the town manager about reporting back to us about what they've done to ensure that these ideas are incorporated into the roles and responsibility, that governance, that cross-cutting governance, what was it, priority that was listed in the report. And I wanted to hear from you about your thoughts on this topic and what is a good way to go about this, that we get buy-in from the people doing this work, as well as we get assurances that this will happen. So I suggest that this committee, like we did with the building committee with the middle school, that we draft a letter that when this report is completed in July, we can give with the report to the select board and town manager. So I want to hear your thoughts on that approach and other ideas. So raise your hand if you'd like to start us off with discussion. I don't see, Pam?
I just, to start us off, I don't know, I'm speaking only from what I read, and I don't know what this letter concept is going to look like.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just, based on what I read in the plan, I think that my sense of accountability is that there needs to be a statement in the plan that advises these people, the town manager, for example, the select board, to issue policy documents that require relevant committees and departments and boards to follow the direction that the town is going in by, for example, adhering to Article 51 and that sort of thing. So I think there should be something in the document, the plan, that talks about issuing a large policy statement from a very high level or something to that effect. And the second thing, which is more granular, is I think there should be something in the plan that indicates that driven into performance agreements and evaluations should be the appropriate adherence to the responsibilities that individual groups, committees, boards, et cetera, have in the context of the plan. In other words, I think it should be inside the plan that we're saying that there is an expectation that these kinds of things will be happening.
Yes.
It may be in addition to the letter, but I think the plan needs to actually assert that. those two things,
Okay.
strong statement of policy and things driven right into the body of what people do day to day that makes them understand they're accountable in their performance and evaluation.
Okay. Mike, did you want to add to that? Oh, you're muted, Mike. There you go.
Well, building a little bit on what Pam was saying is that, first of all, I think sending a letter to the select board is a good idea, to maybe as a separate recommendation of how the board sees this, responsibility unfolding. But I think it's one of the recommendations I made, and I wrote this up in the draft, is that we would follow a RACI model approach, so that every action that we create, where we would define, as you would in RACI, you would identify who is responsible, you would identify who is accountable, you would identify who is consulted on it, and you would also identify who's informed. And I know the plan lists champions, and if you notice, the champions are often the advisory board and or the sustainability director, but both of those organizations have no resources within them. They don't have an organization that they would be delegating to. This would have to come within the governance of the town, and to have, which I also think was a good idea in the plan, where we identify in each one of those actions, we identify who are the partners. But if you look at it closely, there's 7 or 8 partners with each of the actions that are suggested. So there's no sense of who ultimately has responsibility and accountability, because this is going to be a work in progress, right? We're going to see that we'll need to go back to people who have an actual assignment that ultimately, as I think what Pam was saying, is that it gets built into the governance of the town.
Right.
So a RACI model is how oftentimes plans like this are ultimately made ownership. Ownership is defined much more formally.
Okay.
That's my thought.
Does anyone else have comments? Warren?
Yeah, I think the time we should be reaching out to the select board and to the town manager and to others about this is not when the plan's done. It's when we have a draft that's out for review, where we say, look, with the consent of the town manager and the select board, Concord applied to get this grant to write this plan. We've been working on it. We have a draft. If you have any concerns about the recommendations in it, please voice them before the plan's finalized. Because the assumption is that once it's finalized, the town, including the select board and the town manager, are comfortable with what's in it.
Yeah, so I know that the municipal group has been involved in this process all the way through. So they have been informed all the way through the development of this. So I'm not sure what additional...
There's a difference between being informed and being asked to have input and being asked to review a draft of the plan and raise concerns if you're not happy with it.
Kate, would you like to?
Yeah, so the municipal team, including the town manager, have all reviewed the draft as well. So they've seen what you've seen.
Okay, good.
John, did you also want to make a comment?
Yeah, so Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but so I don't recall that there was any language in the plan that laid out an accountability process. So what would be the roles of the board? What would be the roles of the town manager and departments? And then, what would be the process? So, it could be that the plan includes a process of an annual review, maybe by CAB, and it should say, that we do some of that in some of my work, and it is work intensive, so that should be taken into account. But there needs to be a feedback loop. There's one thing for everyone to have their designated responsibilities, but there has to be some information that feeds back so that, the process of implementing the plan is daylighted. And I think that's what gives it accountability. And so if there was an annual progress report where we, say if it's CAB, finds, working with staff, that, this is where we are at with all the different recommendations, then we'll see at least annually how we're doing. And then CAB can make recommendations as to, something behind the pace that it needs to be on, and recommend to whoever needs to hear it that the pace needs to be picked up. If we see some balls getting dropped, we can highlight that. That kind of process, I think, would be useful to outline in the plan. Obviously, you probably have to talk to the town manager about that, but it would be nice to have that in the draft so people know how that's going to work.
So Kate,
and we got a couple other comments on, the next steps section touches on that there'll be annual progress reports, but it's not as specific as who is reporting to who and when. So we did get suggestions to beef that up. So I think we can elaborate on that piece of it as well to make sure that we're reporting annually on how much progress we're making on the plan.
so if I remember correctly, it's annual updates on progress, but then it's also every 5 years is a full review of the plan and kind of go through the process again to just give it a full updating.
Yes, that's what we have in there now.
And so is there, does that satisfy your concerns, John, in the updating process?
Yeah, so that's good to hear. There's something in there. I think it could be elaborated on some more. And, in terms of the reporting, having a long written report on status would be very time consuming, but there could be formats like a traffic light kind of thing of green light, yellow light, red light designation for each action as to, is it on pace? Is it kind of stuck? Is it behind? And that also gives the community an easier way to understand if things are moving along.
Yeah, I like that because as you all know, I'm a team of one. So the time I spend doing reports back on progress is I don't spend making progress. So I know that it's important to report back, but trying to strike a good balance of time and energy. So I think that would make a lot of sense, John.
Yeah, and I think you should think about what's practical for you to do, because I know the reports that we do take a lot of time, and I could see that being overwhelming. So I don't think we should create a process that doesn't work for you either. So.
Right, Courtney.
So I do just want to follow up with what Michael and Pam said. I think if we can kind of designate one, either person, head of a committee or a department, or if it has to be one department, but one kind of point of responsibility. I think it's going to take a lot off of Kate's shoulders to be able to do that, to have someone that is sort of the responsibility. And I do worry because I look through the champions and an awful lot of them are CMLP. And I don't want to put, 40% of this plan on them, even though, it might make sense because it does end with them. But we just need to be thoughtful about that. I think to be successful, if we can think about how we distribute responsibility, but kind of holding one entity responsible would be my vote as well.
Does anyone else want to make a comment that hasn't spoken yet? Anyone else have a comment that has spoken before?
I do, Brian. Just I want to build on
There it is.
the daylighting. Can you hear me?
Yep.
The daylighting that John talked about. I think it would accomplish two things. One is that if we identify an individual or department that for each of these 22 expectations, these actions that we have, it will also help them to prepare how they are going to be responsible for that. This becomes part of a governance and something that it becomes part of their organization, just like all the other pieces of the business that they do day to day. And I think to spring that on them, and what I think Lauren's comment was really right on, to spring that on them once we finish the plan, and let's say we do apply a RACI model, it seems a bit unfair because they hadn't had a chance, one, to think about how they would do that. Just as we wouldn't think that Kate would go through and be responsible or accountable for that plan, or for that matter, that the board would be. So it achieves two things. It gives the expectation and the certainty that somebody has ownership on this and that will be engaged as we go through the wedges of success, right? As we go through each of the years and we get reporting back saying we need to make changes. But it also gives them the opportunity to come back and say, I understand it, but I can or I cannot take on that level of accountability or responsibility for that particular action.
Kate?
I just want to reiterate that that any of the champions you see there, the champions have read that blueprint. So we're not springing any surprises on anyone. That has been one of my goals with this whole planning process. So we're not assigning any departments or divisions any tasks that they are not aware of and on board with and have had time to review and give their feedback on the tasks and the timeline and the partners. And the municipal staff has been a huge help in flushing those out and identifying additional steps and additional partners and what's a reasonable timeline. So not to say that as we begin implementation, there are a lot of steps in here that are on, many of the same limited staff available that, it may start to seem like we've taken on a lot, but there's should be no surprises at this point as far as what's in the plan.
So, Jack.
I just wanted to ask Kate, I agree with all of the comments about making sure that ownership and accountability is clarified, because obviously as a team of one, like what we really need is for each of the departments that should have ownership over these actions to really embrace them and take that on and allocate the resources needed, and to have you as a subject matter expert and the CAB as a, to help push and shape that, hopefully. But do you feel like you're 90% of the way there? Like, do you have a sense, because I'm sure there are some groups that are, very supportive, and other groups that it's kind of like we've got to almost drag them along. And so I think that's where maybe as a group we need to help. We needed to figure out, can we help you reinforce that, whether it's through the plan or through other ways, whether it's through communication and letters. So I want to be sensitive to the time that we have. So we can always talk about this at another time, but I think it's an important element we need to think through before we launch the plan.
I think that's a great plan. I mean, at this point, I feel really good about the level of support for all of the actions and the steps that are in the plan. And I think that it will probably be good to revisit that as we begin implementing. And if we find that, that there are things that we need support with in terms of time, buy-in, resources, all of that, I think that will, of course, come up as we start implementing. So it's a great question. Thanks.
Okay. So to kind of finish this part of the agenda, do we feel we want to do a letter, which was originally what I had planned to pull you on, or do we want to refocus on to going through the champions and making sure that there's a single point of responsibility and partners are more accurate. Do we want to do? How do I proceed with this? Kate, do you have suggestions on how to collect this?
What I was hearing is, it's as a that I've noted down is to make sure to add some more detail to the next steps section of the plan that outlines a bit more in detail how the reporting back will take place. It sounds like that was something that people felt good about. But then otherwise, once it's done and we get to implementation, I think take a closer look at champions and resources to get these things done.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to ask that we move on to the content, which is the most important part right now of the plan. So do you want to give your summary of the highlights of feedback you received?
Yeah, let me share my screen so everyone can see the document. Can you see a document now?
Yes.
Give me a nod. Okay, great. I can't see all of your faces anymore, but I'll do my best. Let me see. Okay, this is better. So I sent this around to the committee yesterday. I have gone through everyone's feedback. Thank you again for sending detailed comments. We also received a lot of comments from community groups and a lot of the folks that are on the phone. So thanks to all of you as well. I've gone through everything at least twice and have started incorporating into the next version of the plan, but also made this list of some of the kind of frequently, the opposite of a frequently asked question, whatever that is, a frequently submitted feedback list, because there were a lot of trends and a lot of agreement on pieces that should be updated for the next version. So I wanted to give you all a sense of kind of the things that I heard in common, and then we'll do a round robin so you all can add any other specific comments that you had, because as you all know, I get to see all of your feedback, but you don't get to see each other's feedback. So I want to make sure that you have an insight into that and have the time to discuss with each other. So I've broken this up into some general feedback and then feedback specific to part 1 and part 2 of the plan. In general, got a lot of positive feedback about, a lot to like in the plan, ambitious but doable. We got a number of questions about how we're measuring success. So I think that's helpful because there are 2 areas in the plan where we have some kinds of measurements or metrics. One is in part 1 under each of the elements. There is a list of what are called indicators of success, and we'll talk about that later in the meeting. But those are the most concrete metrics for each of the plan elements, things that we can measure now and we can set targets for 2030. And then each of the blueprints have a section that's called measuring success. But they're really more of outputs and outcomes and kind of the results that we'll see from them. So I think we just need to maybe name that more appropriately since they're not really a measurement so much. So thanks for that question. And then the other general feedback was a suggestion to flag some of the priority actions that overlap with Envision Concord or were really favorites among the community or have other overlap with other plans to show the connection between this plan and a lot of the other work that's been done. So then in part 1, got a lot of great feedback in terms of part 1, which is kind of the introduction pieces, add to the timeline a number of other things that have happened in the community and acknowledge the work of community groups and volunteers, suggestion to update the graph that shows greenhouse gas emissions trajectory, just to note that all the graphs are going to get updated and tweaked to have a cohesive look and be a bit more easy to read in this version. But we will update that trajectory. Right now it shows a straight line between now and 2050, and we know that that needs to be steeper in the next 10 years. So we'll update that. We got suggestions to highlight some more clearly some of the recommendations from the One Architecture report, which were best practices for resilience in the town centers. Suggestion to define mitigation and adaptation, which we will do. And we just talked about adding to the next steps. A number of you pointed out that section was a little light, so definitely can add in there some of the things that we've already talked about that we know are next steps in terms of looking at an economic analysis of some of these, knowing that there are trade-offs and costs and staff time and resources needed to carry them out, and competing priorities. So I think that ties back to a lot of the accountability that we just discussed. Feedback that the description of the plan elements, there's one page that says this is our plan. It's got 5 elements and 22 actions and 4 principles and 3 guiding leadership priorities. Yeah, that's confusing. So we're gonna work on that. I am in agreement there. And lastly, on part 1, on the priority action list, we got a lot of feedback on the table with the principles, needing to update some of those indicators, which I completely agree. That was really helpful. And then just to kind of clarify, why those are there. So do some work on making that clearer in the next version. And then on the blueprints, there's only 3 here, but that does not mean there was not a lot of feedback on the blueprints. There was certainly many, many details, but some of the trends were question around the residential buildings and commercial buildings and why those were different in terms of their approach, especially as it relates to policy, and questioning if there's opportunity to strengthen some of the policies for residential buildings. The answer to that is just that there are limited policy options for existing residential buildings. So I think there's we flagged in there one that some communities have started implementing, which is a requirement for home energy assessments prior to sale of a house. But I think there's a lot more that we need to review and evaluate. And I think this committee can be really helpful in that and understanding is if that's something you want to do and if there are other good policy options, because that is a tricky area, but one that will have a big impact. A lot of good suggestions from some of the bike folks about making our suggestions around bike infrastructure and creating a bike-friendly community more robust. So that was super helpful. And some general feedback of trying to make the blueprint steps more detailed and more committed, and not so much in favor of the evaluate and assess. So I'm working to strengthen those, to show that it's evaluate to the point of making a recommendation and taking an action, not just evaluate endlessly. And then I just put a note at the bottom, like I said, I got a lot of detailed suggestions for additional stakeholders to add, other engagement strategies, equity considerations, financing mechanisms. So a lot of really helpful, detailed feedback on the blueprints that I'm incorporating now. So I will stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just because I know it makes it hard to see everybody. But I can pull that back up at any point. And I thought we would do a round robin and just open it up to committee members to add additional feedback, or if you want to reinforce something, of course, try to keep it snappy so that we can move along. But I'll just go around the room, so to speak, and then we can discuss after. So maybe Pam, do you want to start? Sorry to put you on the spot. Oh, you're muted. Hold on. You're still muted.
How's that?
That's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to make you go first.
Okay, just a process point. Why can't we see each other's comments? I mean, these should be now publicly available, it would seem. It'd be great to be able to see each other's comments. Is there some prohibition or something? I mean, I get the idea that you can't, give everybody comments and everybody's talking to each other and it violates all sorts of things, but can't we see each other's comments, and will the public see our comments?
I'd have to check on that. Now, we can't, you can't share track changes within a committee because it's deliberation outside of open meeting law. But I'll check on that and get back to you.
I mean, PDFs, not live exchanges, but.
John's shaking his head no. Maybe.
You have to keep it silent. You can't have like a bulletin.
Would you like me to answer that?
Please do. Kate Hodges is on.
Hi, everybody. So if the committee wanted to put together an abridged version of what the majority of the comments are and submit that or have that out for, public review, that's fine. Generally, you don't take the document and have, everybody's edits or whatnot in it unless you wanted to create one document that basically had everybody's individual edits specified and then made it as an Adobe, but then none of you could comment to each other about it. So it becomes a bit difficult because a committee member may just inadvertently say, oh, I saw that you said XYZ and I was wondering, and that's deliberation. So we try to avoid it because it's hard when you're in the conversation with someone to not, just automatically launch into what would be a normal conversation. And a lot of people say, that's deliberation. So in the past, and kind of what was happening with Envision Concord, which is another one that sort of had a large stakeholder group, and is that they basically, and I see Gary waving his hands. Is that they put out
That's
sort of,
exactly
you guys
what
put out
Elise and I did.
updates
And I was just going to say, it was a huge pain.
Right.
Elise and I had to take everybody's comments, transcribe them into one document that we shared. So if Kate has, infinite time.
Well, let me just, this is,
No, she doesn't.
I want to cut. I don't want to turn this into I think you've answered my question. It sounds like it's really tough. So that's cool. I'm good. I'm ready to move on. Now I'll give you my comment.
Well, that was easy. This is a great group.
Okay. All right. So my comments are, in addition to my strong views that we aren't putting enough teeth in this, and we've been down that road a lot. I think it was briefly mentioned. I think it's worth looking at the key partners again, because as I think you summarily said, I detected a certain amount of favoritism to a certain set of, frankly, empowered and interested stakeholders in some instances. And I think having a broader spectrum, and I don't even know how you do that, but I just would encourage thinking about who your key partners are and whether they represent all interests that might be relevant, but which are not empowered interests necessarily, or obviously, relevant, like property owners are always, just enough on that. I just think that would be a useful thing to rethink some of that. I didn't see, the second comment is that I didn't see any serious attention to school transportation. And maybe there's a really good reason for that, but I was somewhat surprised and disheartened by that, because unless there's a really good reason that I missed, I mean, that's huge. And that gets to, the parking lots, electric buses, value systems. And so I just query why we haven't focused more on school transit. And I wonder whether the stakeholder or the key partner component also might involve thinking more about the involvement of the school system in this. The next point was that I thought was worth reiterating is my view that there needs to be much more on the school curriculum. You refer, and I was grateful for the reference, the explicit reference to, I think you said lessons. I envision that as something much more profound. And I think that we could do much more to really drench the whole experience of school into a sense of climate change. And it can occur in social studies, it can occur in science, obviously, it can occur in so many different ways. And I think that what we've said in the plan so far could be greatly beefed up. So that was that. And then the last one is sort of something that just takes me back to the very beginning of our meetings together. And I don't know what's to be done about it, but I think this plan is timid, really timid. And it saddens me a little bit. I think that this is the town that banned plastic bottles in a town meeting. This is the town that voted to get us down to reduce greenhouse gases, dramatically. And the plan is not like that. The plan is not transformational. It doesn't really test us to be really willing to make some sacrifices and changes that are definitely needed if we're going to deal with this this issue. So I really don't know what to do about that. It's something I said at the very beginning. I think this is a plan that is not consistent with the courage of this town in dealing with this issue in at least 2 very recent occasions and in many and historically. And so I regret the timidity of the plan. And I guess that's it for me.
Thanks, Pam. I'm just going to keep going around the room so we make sure we get time for everybody. Warren, do you want to go next?
Sure. 2 things. Yeah, Pam's point about can the plan be more ambitious and should it be? That's a good point. I think we should look at it again to see, are there specific things where we can be more ambitious in terms of the targets we set? And especially you sent around some things for 2030 goals. That's a place where we can be more ambitious. You know, one example was you put in something about, I don't know if it, I can't remember if it was the number of electric vehicles or the number of heat pumps, that was assuming we were continuing along at the rate we've been doing the past few years. Well, we should be aiming for picking up the pace of change there. But that's one place where we could try to be more ambitious. There may be others. The other comment I want to make have to do with the issue of the equity principle in there. At the moment, it's not in there as a principle that we are applying and using to guide what we're recommending. And I saw the comments that said, well, energy efficiency can have will have an equity benefit. I don't think that's true, unless you actually are aiming for equity. And so I had in my comments, and I still think that we should be, if we think equity is a principle that is important to the plan, and I personally think it should be important, we should be changing some of the recommendations to make sure that equity is in there in an explicit way. So for example, in the recommendation that has to do with implementing time of use rates. Time of use rates should be implemented in a way that not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but are implemented in a way that reduce energy inequity and benefit low and moderate income residents of the community explicitly in the way we set rates. Similarly, to the extent that we are implementing things like energy efficiency, there should be special provisions, special incentives that make it easier and more beneficial for low and moderate income residents of the community to actually implement energy efficiency. So if equity is a principle, we got to have a plan that shows we're actually aiming for equity. Those are my comments.
Thanks, Warren. I think that's a good point. And, you know, in each of the blueprints, there is a section on equity, but I think we could go back to all those and make sure that it's really integrated and not just a nod. So that's great. Thanks. Courtney, do you want to go next?
Sure, I have to find the unmute button. Overall, I don't have a whole lot to add more than what I already gave you. I actually, I think it's coming along and fairly well laid out. I think the thing that I like to see this time is the sort of the overarching leadership priorities. I do think that lots of thought needs to be put into how we implement that. And we've already talked about that. So, and I know we didn't necessarily come to a specific strategy there, but I think that needs to be continued to be top priority. I think it would be easy for this to get set aside if we don't have a clear plan of action to get this sort of implemented into the various town departments and groups that need to champion that. And I know they've seen it, but seeing it is different than figuring out how to put it into practice, really figuring out how to change or enhance what they're doing, and if they're already doing it already. So, I think that's really the next, it needs to be highlighted in the next step. Other than that, I don't have much else to add at this point.
Thanks. Michael?
Well, in the interest of keeping this snappy, as we were just, Kate was just saying, I spent a good deal of time in the comments, and so I wrote up everything that I'm saying so that you could actually see the language and make it more clear. But there are 3 areas I think that would strengthen the plan. One is I believe it needs to be higher level of specificity. We have 5 elements and 22 actions, and each of those actions are not at a level of specificity. And by that, I mean, there are no commitments. You can't, it's going to be hard to be able to measure something if it doesn't have that commitments. The second area I thought this plan can be strengthened on is in the indicators of success. As you look at those really closely, it's going to be almost very difficult to measure and evaluate if you don't have the indicator right. I think the board could go back and look at that with much clarity. I said earlier, and I think this is the overarching theme for the whole plan, is that and it has been said, but I think it's worth mentioning again, that there simply isn't the area of responsibility and accountability within our governance structure about who do you go to as you start to implement this. This will become an operations plan, and it will have milestones along the way, and there will need to be changes. You can't go to a group of 6 or 7 partners, right, to sort that out. And you certainly, I don't believe, can go to the sustainability director or to the board. You're going to need to have that daylight that John talks about that we'll be able to have. And then to close, I think the plan is very weak on the key element that will drive this, and that is the financing side. All the mechanisms out there about how to get capital to actually introduce every one of those 22 actions. There's no indication of what that might be. We've talked about on-bill financing. There's been talking about other areas, but that was dropped from the action. I think that would help. And then lastly, the overall plan will have a series of wedges, and those wedges will have to be mapped back to precisely what we said we would achieve by 2030. And when I read the plan, I can't see how we're actually going to implement that operationally, where the 22 elements or the 22 actions over this period of time by 2030 will achieve this absolute quantitative number. So that was my reaction. Lovely, lovely, lovely in terms of laying out the narrative of the emergency. I think that was probably its greatest strength, but I think operationally there's some more work to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Jake, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I will just highlight a couple of items that jumped out to me that were in my comments. One was, we have this 25% reduction by 2020, and it's sort of glossed over in the introduction to the plan. I think given it's 2020, there needs to be some discussion of like, where are we, what are we doing to try and get past whatever it is, the 6% reduction that we had in 2016. And that leads into my other point, which is around the responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions tracking and accountability around that. I understand the entire inventory is more difficult to pull together. But I think it's going to be really important that the light plant, most likely the light plant, needs to take ownership of and try and be innovative in tracking emissions and energy use across the built environment for the town, and have that be a resource to the town and the residents to understand where we are, given that's the largest contributor and they have all of the data, at least on electricity. But so I think there's an opportunity to maybe push more for that, and maybe that's already happening and I just don't know. But I think that's an area that the light plant has to lead, and they have to be, I think, called out to take leadership on that, as well as all of the other incentives and rate structures and other methods that we need to implement to get the reductions that we need. On the blueprints, in talking through and in hearing everyone's comments on the responsibility and who should be owning it, I'm wondering if we should maybe revisit that champion structure and maybe look at, like, does that turn into, there's primary responsibility? And I think, like, yes, the sustainability, Kate, you're going to be the champion from the sustainability side, and Cab's going to be the board that helps try and drive the town to get, achieve these goals. But at the end of the day, someone within the town departments who should own that has to be responsible for that action, primary responsibility. And we can list the partners, but I think we need to get closer to, who owns it and who's going to be accountable. And similarly, on the indicators of success, I would suggest that each indicator, there's some confirmation on who is responsible for maintaining, tracking, or owning that, so that's tied together. Because right now that wasn't clear to me. So that's all I had for additional comments.
Thanks. Ruthie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, actually, I don't have anything more to add. I think everybody's, said it, and the themes, I think, are pretty clear. So in the mind of being snappy, I won't repeat what others have said.
Thanks for being the snappiest. John, how about you?
So I think, overall, I was pleased that the plan became a much more focused climate action plan than I think where we were starting out at. So I appreciate that focus came about. So I thought that was good. On the climate preparedness section, I think that part needs to be strengthened and maybe rethought a little bit, in the sense that it focuses a lot on extreme climate change events, which I think is a tendency people have. We focus on the disasters, the hurricanes, those kinds of things. But it's also our average climate is shifting, and for Concord, that has profound implications. Ecologically, our ecosystems are going to shift to those that are more like what we see further south. Our daily weather patterns are going to be in a warmer, wetter way. And so we need to think through those implications, as well as preparing for the extreme events. And then my biggest problem with the plan is kind of in the accounting of the emissions. And as we've talked, that it strikes me that what's happening with the inventory should be part of the accountability process, because ultimately that's the thing that we're going to be measuring, right? Is what's our carbon footprint, and the way we measure our carbon footprint is important. And I have a problem with a fundamental problem with the way the town's counting renewable energy certificates. My view, and this is an area I think where there's a lot of debate, but my view is basically it shouldn't be counted. I don't think purchasing renewable energy certificates results in real reductions. And so, in the plan, we're projecting a 35% reduction by 2030. That probably needs to be a little more aggressive than that, but 15% of the 35%, or 15 of those points are buying renewable energy certificates. And so if it was a small amount, I wouldn't care so much, but since it's so significant, I think we really have to rethink whether buying renewable energy certificates is an appropriate thing to do. So that's my comments.
Thanks, John. Brian Crowns?
Unmute. I'll try to be snappy and not, well, I am going to repeat because the main thing I wanted to comment upon has been touched upon. The one thing kind of looking through this again now is I feel like on part 1, bottom of page 8 and 9, which is showing the curves, and then looking at the indicators, most of which have an explicit greenhouse gas reduction metric, but not all do, that probably could, is kind of tying together a narrative of like, here's what this plan gets us, here's the remaining gap through 2030 to 2050, and then that kind of leaves a question mark of, and then what? How do we close it? Whatever gap remains in that area between the 2050 line and the 2030 wedges that we're not getting to, and how do we think about closing those gaps in the future? I think from like a high level narrative from not from the resilience, but from the action piece, like I'd like to see that be a tight narrative where it's like, okay, I understand we need to do more. This plan will get us so far, but we're going to need to find something in this area to get us over the line, just from a high level. And I'll stop talking there.
Thank you. Very snappy. Peter. Oh, you're muted, Peter.
Unmute, there we go. I second what Warren and Michael and Pam were all focusing on, and I appreciate your views and your insight and just what Brian was alluding to there. These benchmarks as we move forward. When we get to these benchmarks, what will success look like for us, and can those become our targets, and can we make those a little more visible as we move forward? So I don't have anything else to add.
Thanks. I think that just leaves Brian Folds.
Yeah. General feedback is it's impressive to see all the different efforts that have gone on around sustainability throughout town kind of coalesce into a single document. And what I've seen is kind of highlights in a big picture. A lot of people talk about that, but when it gets to the implementation steps and the blueprints, it is good to see the conversation move forward into, we want these big picture things, but now we're starting to break the problems down and document them into these blueprints that can take more action. Now, I did notice that a lot of them were worded very much from the standpoint of the municipal group. And that makes a lot of sense. It gets a lot of buy-in from them. But we need to be a bit more detailed from those involved in those steps and those advocating for those steps to really continue the conversation forward of breaking these problems down into something more and more manageable and actually implementable. And that's about the only comment other than ones that have already been stated that I really want to add, because I know in my edits, I had a lot of detail. So I won't go through all of those. And that's it.
Thanks. Brian, do you want to open it up for any discussion, or do you want to move on to the indicators and then kind of do the indicator feedback on the indicators and general conversation together? How do you want to make these of the rest?
So we're at 5:15 and we do have some time. Would people like to do a discussion about anything that you heard in the round robin comments? Well, let me hold on for public comments until a little bit. Anyone on the committee? Warren.
Yeah, without wanting to open up a whole
That's what I'm afraid of.
lengthy discussion, but I tend to disagree with John about the issue of renewable energy certificates, and maybe I should try to schedule a time to talk to him about it, because I do see the purchase of renewable energy certificates by the town leading to a reduction in emissions.
So I know that John and I have had a great discussion over email about this topic. And I think it's worth this committee understanding the strategy in detail at a future date for all of us to be on the same page with how they work, how it's additive, and to go through that. And I think we clearly do not have time to do that in this meeting. But if there's, I'm probably going to bring that back up at a future meeting as a potential topic for discussion by itself. Is there anyone else who'd like to, I saw Brian is unmuted and then Pam. Brian Cranston, do you have anything?
I was merely going to second that. That's a pretty big topic that I think, like, I know I've been sort of out of the loop on the evolution of thinking on that topic as it's occurred in town over the past few years. And it is fairly central to our plan. So I do think we should chunk out a good amount of time, a lot of time at a future date to review that as a group. So I just second that.
Yeah, and it was voted in as part of Article 51 as the town strategy. So I don't want to phrase it as we're going to stop and make a new strategy. I think it's first understand the existing strategy, and if this group feels that it's not working, we can then broach that about changing. Pam, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just very quickly, and I know we can't open this up, but I would love to understand why we have not focused on the schools more. If somebody could illuminate that for me, both in terms of curriculum and in terms of transit. Or did I miss something? It's possible I missed something, but I just don't understand this.
So I saw this because, I'm working on the school buses. So in the plan, I saw schools as bundled into other things. For example, municipal electrification of the municipal fleet covers buses and the bus fleet. And then there was things about access for complete streets would cover things like biking in the ring road. And then adding it to the curriculum was its own topic. So they don't have their own blueprint, but they are scattered throughout there and incorporated, at least I saw, in some other topics. Is there?
I guess.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to. It just seems like there's such getting to the transformational, have courage thing. I mean, I wonder why we can't say specifically some things about the use of buses, for example. I mean, I'm just brainstorming, but the use of buses by the students, or the expectations with respect to driving private cars, or be more forthright about the centrality of all of that to what we're talking about. It just seemed to be, as you said, it's kind of dispersed in a very soft way. I think those are dealing with it more frontally might be that kind of courageous stuff that we start to serve up to people. like there should not be a new parking lot for cars, and we don't do anything with teeth. And I also think we don't really try to use the school piece and transportation to school and from school in the central way it really should be occurring here. But I don't want to waste time on it now. I just wonder, it mystifies me.
We'll know that I'm working with the schools right now on the purchase of the next bus, the next electric bus. So things I know.
But please, if I may, Brian, purchasing an electric bus is a soft lob. And I don't, it's not a systemic.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Yeah.
I agree.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
just
Kate.
jump in? Brad has let me know he wants to make a public comment and he has to leave at 5:30. If you would entertain a bit of
Yes.
order comment.
Yeah.
Brad, do you want to unmute and thank you, Kate.
I really appreciate that. Just a couple of comments on to agree with the aggressiveness of this plan. As you guys all probably know, the IPCC is warning of kind of catastrophic consequences piling up if we don't get to 45 or 50% emissions reduction by 2030. And so if this plan doesn't have a goal that is 45 or 50% reduction by 2030, it's kind of not good enough. And that means kind of all hands on deck and making hard choices. And just another, Concord is not the victims here. We're, the affluent community that really should make a goal of getting, I would suggest 50%, not 35% reduction. That means using all the resources you have. There's another climate committee, and I did mention this to Kate, called CSEC. And CSEC was actually responsible for a lot of what the accomplishments, and most of it's before I was on it, in the first document. But it wasn't actually mentioned, and it's not thought of as maybe a vehicle in the second document. Is this something we would like to, I would like you to urge you to think of resources like that in the various things. And it takes assignments and CSEC can only do sort of soft stuff until they're told to do stuff. But I just want you to remember that other climate committee that's actually would be quite busy doing stuff like this.
Yes. So I saw that comment you gave to Kate about CSEC, and I think it was the assumption that they'd be very integral to so many of these things that they didn't actually get a direct mention, which is amazing. So that's being corrected.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to make a comment that is a member on the round robin discussion? Because we'll move on to metrics next.
Brian, I'd like to make a couple of comments. First of all, putting it in a positive frame, this plan is being talked around the town, that people are excited by it. So this is good that they're looking for it. But I think they're also looking for, and we use the word transformative, and we ask the question, what the heck does that mean? Well, transformative, if we wanted to understand it more clearly, think about Article 40. Article 40 says that in 2021, we as a town will no longer expand the infrastructure of fossil fuels. That's transformative. And I would really hope to see that we have more commitments that reflect that kind of expectation of, building on what Brad was just saying. If we're going to achieve what we want, we're going to have actions and commitments all the way systemically to do that. And we need to strengthen those actions that we have. They're shaped around encourage or consider or investigate. And they need to change, I believe, to enablers, but this is what we will do. Policy, bylaw, ordinances, because that's the only way I believe that we're going to solve this environmental emergency, or at least make it the contributions that our little town has to be meaningful.
Right.
And
So
that would be my major suggestion around that. And it
right,
goes
which
back
is
to quantitative.
and that's why we had on the agenda to do that discussion about accountability, because in the feedback it is clear that this group desires that. So I think we'll continue.
But I'm talking about commitments.
Yeah.
We have to have people accountable to those commitments. But what are those commitments?
Right, which is
quantitatively.
Which is what we want to get to in the details of the blueprint, is make sure that we have a real good solid foundation to push forward on with what we're talking about doing. So
okay.
Does anyone else want to talk about any topic before we go on to metrics? I don't see any hands. Kate, would you like to take us through the metrics sheet?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. I sent this around. I think it would probably be a bit tedious for me to walk you through every single metric, but I will just give you the top line here and see if anyone has feedback. So many of you commented on these in the first draft, but these are all incorporated into the fact sheets about each plan element. And the idea is that these are indicators that we have some kind of baseline for, ideally now, that's something we can measure progress to. They're not necessarily prescriptive of if we achieve all these targets, we will meet our goals. But the idea is that they're things that we can clearly measure that will show progress towards our goals, and that the targets are ambitious, that they're things like if we were to accelerate EV adoption so that 50% of new purchases are EVs, what does that look like compared to our baseline where we are today? So there were, no 2030 targets in the first draft because we were still working on them, me and the consultant team. So what I sent around yesterday is an update to, just pulled out these tables from all of the fact sheets and show what we're suggesting for revisions and potential targets for each of the areas. And the idea is that we would update these on a regular basis, of course, to kind of be able to add some measurement to what we're trying to do. So I'll stop blabbing and see if folks have any particular ones they want to comment on. You can also send me feedback by email. I know I just sent it yesterday. So if you take a look later today or tomorrow and can send me your feedback by Friday, that would be really helpful.
Okay, can you explain, I'm trying to understand this. So the 2030, 74,000 metric tons, right? How does that relate to where we said we would be, assuming that you added all these up? How does that relate to what our charge is and in 2030 when we're looking at the actual final number, whether it's MMBTUH or carbon or whatever? How do we know that each of these is, where are we ending up as a percent on goal, I guess is the question, when we achieve, let's say we achieve that 74,000.
So that was what I was just saying, Michael, that these are not intended to be like, if we do all of these things, we will necessarily achieve our goal. We certainly could add them up and say like what that would mean. But that 74,000 is strictly a straight line. What we would need to do to be on that straight line is 80-50. So we can definitely update that. It seems like the preference is to make that much more aggressive and aligned with IPCC, so we can update that. But that was just to give you a sense of what that means. So all the comments here explain one of the assumptions that went into those.
Okay.
One of my comments is I like the fact that a lot of these metrics are aggressive. For example, getting 50% of the vehicles by 2030 in Concord to be electric. That's, it's almost 8,000 vehicles, but we only have something like 16,000 vehicles in town. So that's pretty aggressive in 10 years. And many of the other metrics are aggressive. Some of them may be scaled as a straight line, but others are aggressive. I think that's good. That's generally my feedback. And I think as we start to do and implement these blueprints and work with these champions, that other metrics will come out of those that may be more appropriate for tracking progress. But again, that goes back to an overriding comment I've had about this process, which is that it's the first one. And this is going to be a document that gets annual updates and 5-year, reworkings. And so it will only get better with time. And I think that's a big part of what CAB's job is to implement some of the policies and things, but also to make sure this document over the next few years gets better and better.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about, an annual update, and Jake mentioned that doing the full greenhouse gas inventory is a lot of time and number crunching, but this is something that we can update these metrics, and that gives us a sense of progress without doing a full greenhouse gas inventory, and that's the intention there, is it's more frequently and easily measured.
Any other comments on the metrics?
Well, this is John. Just to reiterate on the clean energy goal, that if the issue of RECs goes a different way, then that number becomes much lower and takes out a big chunk of the projected savings. So the implications important. And what I'm worried about with the plan is, I know the plan will get updated at some point, and we'll see how the thinking evolves. But basically, it's locking in that approach for the next few years at least. And so it is a really important thing to get resolved. I'm not saying everyone has to agree with me, but I think it's an important topic.
Kate,
Mm-hmm.
when I hadn't had a chance to really look at these, when do you want us to get you comments on any of these targets by?
By Friday would be ideal. I'm working on revised content of the whole plan to go to design, and my deadline is the end of the week.
Okay, thank you.
One last comment, or maybe not last, but this sort of goes to just the tracking of this. I think if that isn't already being considered, just how these are tracked, it's a fair bit of data, and it gets tough to track even a couple things. So I think it just can't be overlooked as we're thinking about the complete picture of how this is implemented, that the tracking of this data and reporting of this is going to be a pretty important part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. Great.
Yeah, so if there is no more comments, maybe we should, does the committee feel we're ready to move on to public comments? Seeing no disagreement. Is anyone who wants to make a public comment that was listening into our wonderful riveting conversation? Yes, Janet. You're muted, Janet.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I wanted to reiterate what Brad had to say, is that I think the role of CSAC is important, and it should be recognized and spelled out in some way. And I didn't see it mentioned in the document as it was. The other thing is, and this is just a question, and I don't remember what was in the document clearly enough, but the advantage of going to more electricity is also cleaner air. Is that pointed out anywhere in your document, and should it be?
It's pointed out in a couple of the blueprints. A couple of people actually made comments that that wasn't necessarily something we would see a benefit at a local level. But I think it is noted in there.
Okay, thanks.
Does anyone else from the public want to make a comment? Laura, you're muted right now.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks.
So I will echo Pam's comment that, you know, the plan is a little timid. I was really happy to see the indicators. I either didn't get that or I didn't see it. Both are entirely possible. Those seem much more aggressive. So to me, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between sort of your quantitative targets and the steps that you're going to take to get there. You know, everybody has said wonderful things. I echo a lot of those things. So I'll just leave it at, like, I think that there were a couple of places, especially in the big ticket items, home and, you know, residential homes being being retrofitted, in, for instance, you know, getting them a home energy assessment and then actually motivating them to retrofit their home. There seems to be like a real lack of innovation. Like, what are the transformative steps that one takes to make a homeowner, you know, take the educational material that has been outlined there and take those incentive programs that already exist. Those two things are not new, like those already exist. How do you actually make that into a retrofit project that has measurable value for our energy, our emissions reductions? So I think that there's just a lot of, I know that this is a first draft and there are going to be many iterations, but the timeline is short and it feels like there could be more in this plan that spells out some of those really sticky subjects. Like, how do you really get people on commuter, you know, on the commuter rail? Like those, I feel like there's just like a lack of like deep dive into those really sticky subjects. So I'd like to see more of that.
Okay, go ahead, Gary. I'm sorry, you're muted.
No. Yeah, so I was going to echo a few of the comments that you've already heard, not that you need it. I guess while I'm sympathetic to, you know, Pam's point and Brad's comment, you know, I'm a scientist myself, so I recognize very clearly how much needs to happen, how quickly. I also recognize from Kate's perspective and Kate Hodges and even Crane and the town's perspective, we need to be realistic in terms of what can we accomplish, you know, from a practical standpoint, which goes to what Laura just pointed out. And I think Michael kind of pointed us in that direction. So what I would encourage us to do is, you know, what are the big ticket items? Yeah, it's buildings and transportation. So how are we going to realistically and practically strengthen our indicators in those two areas? It's money. So think practically, how do we finance deep building retrofits? How do we make that a practical reality for Concordians? How do we finance shifting people to public transit? You know, what would it take for the town to pay people to take public transit? And we've got to think about the financing mechanisms that are going to make those things reality, because otherwise it is hard to ask town department heads, you know, to implement just because we want it to happen. So I totally agree. We need to make this happen. I am just pushing back a little bit that, you know, we as citizens can demand it, but we have to think of how our town staff are going to implement it. So splitting the baby, maybe.
Yeah, I had similar concerns as well. Does any other public comments? Linda?
Hi, I'm going to reiterate everything that everyone said. That was great. I think everyone had great feedback. Mine is more simple. I think the plan, like the general idea, it needs to be simplified so that people can really follow it better, people who aren't like immersed in the climate world. And then you define the problem really well, and it's frightening. And then to just simplify it into a couple, you know, like couple buckets. And then, you know, you have your metrics, which is fantastic, identifying what the big ticket items are, but also identify the big ticket actions. What are the most important ones, and why do we need to get them done first? You may have had it in there, but it wasn't clear to me. It just didn't pop out. I mean, I felt like I had to dig for it a little bit. So that would just be my general feedback. So the plan is more clear, more impactful. What do we need to do? And not just numbers, but like percentages towards our goal. Because again, to the layperson, if you talk about metric tons of CO2, their eyes are going to glaze over. It'd be great if we're like, if we do this thing, we'll get 50% to our goal by 2030. So we're going to do this thing first. And that's why it's important. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments before we propose to adjourn? I see Pam Hill.
Yeah, I just in terms of wrapping up here, and this is maybe left field, but just picking up on what Warren said about equity, picking up what Brad said about, you know, actually remembering that it is this kind of community that has caused the problem, and thinking about it in terms of even how we measure emissions. I mean, there is a point of view that emissions should not be measured from the smokestacks that created the t-shirts. It should be measured on the backs of the consumers who use them. So I guess I'm just wondering if there is a way to gently but pointedly remind the population to whom this is directed that we are the consuming affluent population that is driving the planet to crisis. And it is just very clear. And I think we should think about, maybe as an educational moment, trying to incorporate that kind of idea into the plan, because one of the ways to change behavior is to try to help all of us, you know, understand our own personal responsibilities. And it's fascinating that this is the model of the community that has caused it.
John.
Yeah, so to Pam's point, some cities are doing consumption-based emission inventories. Usually the big cities, they're harder to do because a lot of the data is hard to get, but it could be we have a recommendation that the town assess its ability to do a consumption-based emissions inventory, and that would get at some of these issues. Boston has included that in their CAP, and we've been starting to study that in Cambridge. But it's not I'll just say it's not an easy thing to do, but there is a way.
Actually, if I may, I would like to add that as a specific comment, that because actually consumption-based comes up all the time. And I think we could just weave in language narrative and also maybe that kind of approach, because it's not a peculiar thing at all. And it does get to the very issue of, you know, how do we really fit into the problem?
Yep. All right, Warren.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on Gary and Linda's comments. I think they both raised some good points. I think we have to be realistic about what could be resolved within the time before this plan needs to be submitted. And we only have a month and a half. And as we acknowledged in some previous conversations, after this plan gets submitted, there's going to be some significant unfinished business that needs to be addressed afterwards, which has to do with the cost of some of these different acts, these different actions that are in the plan, and the emissions benefits of some of these different actions. And one of the things the committee will need to address, and it can't be done in the next month and a half, there's not time, But after that is going through and say, where's the real bang for the buck? And to say, hey, maybe there's so much bang from getting electric vehicles out on the road that we should up that target and really focus on that and de-emphasize something else, whereas maybe one of the other actions rises to the surface. But we really need to have a debate after the plan's submitted about where we should really focus, where the town can make the most rapid and most significant progress.
Mike, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, quick one. I think Linda Raid's just made something go off in my mind. You know, when you do fundraiser, you see a barometer and you see the red mark go up and you're trying to get to the top of the red mark and you're making it very clear, where are we on that pathway of success? How do we know we're driving in the right direction? And bringing that down to the citizenry that can understand it versus, you know, X amount of tons of carbon dioxide, et cetera, probably gets them more engaged in what it is that we're trying to do and trying to change the behavioral patterns of people who ultimately are going to be responsible for the success of this plan. So I think that's a wise suggestion and I appreciate that.
Okay. Laura, I saw you had your hand up. Would you like to make a comment? Laura Davis?
Yeah, thank you. Just piggybacking on what Michael just said, the other thing is that it's not just about the public, it's also about your key partners who haven't drunk the climate Kool-Aid. So having those things really clearly spelled out in terms of like their progress towards a goal that has been mandated by Article 51, you know, like, and having that spelled out in terms of progress, I think is helpful for that perspective. The other thing I wanted to say was just a question actually, which is, you know, the Article 40 was mentioned in this meeting, but it isn't spelled out, it isn't called out in the plan at all. And the idea behind it, creating a bylaw that would require all new construction be fossil fuel free, is like only vaguely called out in this like engage stakeholders and conduct research to understand options for local policy mechanisms that include bylaws. So I'm just wondering, like, is that because the town can't, you know, have a position on something like that? I mean, CAB clearly has, you know, fully endorsed that bill. So why can't it be more explicitly spelled out that like, this is something that we need and it just needs to happen? I mean, I know that this is all about walking the line between people who really care about the climate, you know, and that's like their thing, and then people who are trying to make the budgets balance. I get that. But I'm just like, there are so many places like that where it's so not specifically spelled out. And I'm just wondering if in that particular instance, if it could be more clearly spelled out.
I don't have an answer for that question, but maybe, Kate, do you have an input onto that? Article 40 being in the plan?
Is it Kate Hanley or Kate Hodges?
Kate Hanley.
I mean, Laura, I don't think it wasn't any particularly intended to be left out. I think it was just at the time that we were doing a lot of these actions was, you know, as that article was still being developed. So it wasn't intentionally not mentioned.
Okay. Anyone else want to make a comment? Peter.
I just wanted to explore perhaps the ability of this committee to make recommendations that, you know, suggestions for the superintendent. You know, this is what success would look like if you championed these. And for us to have perhaps a document or these recommendations published on our town website, so that people can reference them. You know, I should make this change because the Climate Action Advisory Board is advising me to do this. You know, we are the members of this community that are trying to move the needle. And most people are not gonna, you know, start moving unless they're being pushed. And I know that goes to several of the things that have been brought up this evening. But I'd love, you know, for, you know, as someone who teaches in the school to say, you know, this is what our town is recommending for us to do.
this is why we should do it. And, you know, and then as, you know, as a science teacher, I can fill in the, you know, this is why we do that. But, you know, we found ourselves at this point in time now where we need to start making these decisions. We need to live a little more deliberately. We need to decide, you know, that what are the choices we're going to make as a family, as a community, and we're helping to make these choices for our community. They've put it upon us to ask, you know, what do we need to do? Well, this is what we could do, and to have that list. And yes, next car you buy, make that electric. You know, are you changing your diet? Are you not going to let your junior drive to the high school? You know, whatever that looks like, but we could probably generate a pretty impressive list. This is what success will look like for our town. These are the choices that we need to make, and you know, and we sign it at the bottom, Climate Action Advisory Board.
So I know that CSECT recently has done a great pamphlet, and it was about to launch a big campaign around, Janet, what was it, Concord's future home, and then it's crossed out, says now. But basically it was a holistic picture of what a resident could do in their own life to help move these kinds of goals forward. And it broke it down and linked them to the resources to take those actions. So that is something, I mean, that's a great effort that CSECT has done in that. And yes, it would be.
We should endorse that.
Right.
It's on the town site. You go to concordma.gov/yoursustainablehome.
Okay. I'm going to go to Ruthie because I haven't heard much from her.
Pete, I'd be happy to work on that list with you. I mean, I think, you know, buying an electric vehicle is a really serious investment, but not driving your humongous tank SUV from one side of Route 2 to the other to pick up your kid is a much smaller, simpler investment. So I'd be happy to work with you on a specific kind of school student list, because I think, I mean, I just have to say that if COVID-19 were related to climate change and all the things that we're doing to not get sick and die were in response to climate change, we'd be done, right? I mean, think of the changes you've made in your own personal life in the last 2 months and that you will make when you go back to your office. So the ability to change in ways that we never thought were possible is happening right now. In some ways, this is like a very particular moment to say, you're terrified of getting sick and dying, and our planet is, you know, is sick and dying. So I'd be happy to work with you on that specific thing. But I think it's a really like terrifying and critical moment of change for all of us right now.
I know that John was waiting to make a quick comment. John?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's an important point is that we can't just have a plan that the town puts out and implements, right? Somehow you have to engage the whole community. And we know from all the different efforts that many communities have done that, you know, just giving people information doesn't help. That, you know, it has to be a mix of requirements, has to be a mix of incentives, and it has to be a mix of social pressure, I think. And I don't think the town can just conduct something that will get us to where we need to be. It has to be a community-wide campaign that involves a wide range of stakeholders. And so, you know, you hear this a lot with local climate action plans, that there's a need to basically create a community campaign to get you to the goals. And it can't be all on the town to get us there, because that's not going to happen.
And historically, CSECT has done a great job of that. So Pam Hill,
just quickly, I mean, this has been a really fabulous discussion, and I just wanted to highlight, number one, the idea of the kind of very physical barometer kind of thing. I think that, like, the library has, you know, books that are going higher and higher used to. So I think that sort of, you know, physical representation of how we're progressing is a very good thing. I also think that what Peter said and Ruthie agrees with is also a good thing. And it's getting a little bit to what I was hoping for, which in the transformative realm, which is to be a guide to what it really will take, you know, and to offer up actual suggestions that might be very disturbing maybe at first, but which make sense and are so analogous to what we're experiencing with COVID. And I'm very excited about the idea of us offering, you know, concrete, you know, this is what it takes. You know, we just can't drive across Route 2 like that. We, you know, have to, you know, subsidize certain purchases, et cetera. And I just very much agree with what has been said in the last couple of minutes. And I too will be happy to work on any kind of, you know, list that sort of helps the town see what it really takes.
Great. Anyone else want to comment, raise their hand? All right. We are coming up to 5 minutes of 6. So I'm going to entertain an adjournment. Does anyone want to make the motion?
I move we adjourn.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want a second?
I'll second.
Okay, great. And all of those that would like to adjourn, why don't we do a raise your hand instead of, great. I believe we have a unanimous decision.
Nice.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Wow.
Be well.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye all.